Why do I keep doing this to myself? Hey, it's me, your breadtube dad. Today, I found one of the worst things, and now I must show it to you. Again, I recently found out that anti-Semitic ghouls have been pretending to support Palestine in its struggle against a brutal ethnic cleansing campaign to grow their following on social media and spread their bullshit. So, no, I need this. Let's talk about Stop Zionist Hate and how the far right uses moments like this to spread anti-Semitism. Oh. Okay. For the content. Just a neat drinky. I also never hold a cup with my left hand because I need to show off the funny comic that I have on a mug, but I also am left-handed. Okay, team, gather around the comforting glow of your screens and let's dive into the digital abyss yet again. Why? Because the far right's at it again. They're masquerading as champions of Palestine, using a struggle against ethnic cleansing as a Trojan horse to spread their evil ideology. Because, of course they are. It's a day on the modern internet, so the far right's influence is ballooning like a balloon, infiltrating our social feeds, muddying the waters of political discourse, and taking a gigantic shit on the humanitarian catastrophe to grow their following and use it to spread Holocaust denial and the like. And you know, that sucks. It would be easy to say something like, Twitter isn't real life, but sadly, it kind of is. So understanding how fascists use posting to poison people is important. I decided this is what I needed to inflict upon you, like the living embodiment of a hangover that I am, because literally the moment that I posted my last video on the history of Israel and Palestine, I came across this post by extremism researcher Elad Naharai exposing Stop Zionist Hate, a Twitter account, as one of many accounts which are using the war in Gaza to sneak their ideology to new people, peddling hate under the guise of solidarity. And I was like, shit. Because I had seen people I respected, retweeting this account, and here they were on the record just spouting full-on Holocaust denial. They were just one of many accounts to do so. So here I am to drag you into what I found, kicking and screaming. Because the line must be drawn here. This far. No farther. Star Trek references. That's timely. Your audience is in their 20s. Nobody watches 1998 movies about the Borg anymore. So we're setting sail into a sea of deception, charting a course through the murky waters of online extremism. Again. Expect a journey filled with bizarre twists. Well, not that bizarre, but it's a lot of stuff I have said multiple times, scattered across many of my videos, but we do need to explore this thin line between critique and conspiracy, armed with nothing but our wits and either an upper or a downer. Your choice. So, if you've ever wondered why I subject myself to this digital dumpster diving, it's because someone's got to. And if we can't laugh at the absurdity of it all, the ghouls have already won. Let's do this. Initially, you might think, hey, look, I found a new account, an advocate for Palestinian rights. That's something that I can get behind. Luckily, we have researchers and journalists like Talia Jane who miraculously spoke to me for this video. And once you start scratching at the surface of the account, the red flags are very close behind. Red flags like some infamous follows and followers. Some of their follows do have some plausible deniability, like Elon Musk, who has just been dipping his toes further and further into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories as he falls down the mother of all K-holes, and some with less deniability, like Lucas Gage, a literal neo-Nazi. Let's list just a few of Gage's resume hits. 1, he's been associated with American Third Position, which aligns itself with fascism and aims to appeal to the white working class by avoiding explicit Nazi ideography. He has talked about terms like white genocide, a white nationalist staple going all the way back to the white power movement of the 80s. 3. He was the chairman of the National Youth Front, the youth wing of the American Freedom Party, a white nationalist hate group. And 4, he has regularly spouted anti-Semitism, including quotes from Mein Kampf.
You just call everyone you disagree with a Nazi.
And then there's the complaint about the lack of a white category for reporting hate crimes, a fact that is burdened with the sticky issue of being not in fact true. At the most generous, this shows laziness or sloppiness in research. At worst, it's because this is obscuring a critical detail. After all, it plays into the victim narrative often excreted from the mouths of the whiniest babies on the internet, white nationalists. But wait, there's more. Our friend Stop Zionist Hate also visited a very interesting Twitter space which featured Nick Fuentes, who's probably most notable for his recent gig in Kanye West's entourage during his villain arc last year. Nick Fuentes is a noted Holocaust denier and Adolf Hitler admirer.
You just call everyone you disagree with a Nazi.
He has said he wants America to be under a, quote, Catholic Taliban rule. I have concerns. And when Talia Jane did dare to call out this Beijing Olympics level of red flags, Stop Zionist Hate did the thing that all very normal people do when you get called out for literal stuff you've done and said. He threatened legal action. Nothing says I'm on the right side of history like a cease and desist letter hastily cobbled together from a Google search.
I asked them, I was like, are you aware that the accounts that you're fraternizing with are white nationalists and that the content that you're elevating is white nationalist? And then they blocked me. And I was like, that's a bad move. That's probably the dumbest move you could make. And then they came out and they released a cease and desist against someone for criticizing Lucas Gage. And it was this really ham-fisted, like, someone Googled, what does a cease and desist look like? And they wrote this nonsense because they argued that Lucas Gage, the white nationalist, was being defamed as a white nationalist, neo-Nazi type of guy, which is, if you Google him, there you go.
Defamation for saying the thing that you are and have said publicly for years.
Yeah. Like, literally, right now, Google Lucas Gage, see what comes up. Like, it's not defamation. It doesn't work. And the letter itself was nonsense. It was goofy. And it was also very telling that the person that they pulled up to defend the most was this guy. Meanwhile, there's countless Muslim, specifically Palestinian American students, teachers, doctors, nurses, like the whole gamut of people out there who are being slandered as terrorists. And this account is not pulling up shitty like cease and desists to support those people.
All of this is to say is that there's a clear case that Stop Zionist Hate is using the pro-Palestinian cause as a Trojan horse to advance anti-Semitic and white nationalist talking points. It's a tactic as old as time. Jump on a legitimate concern to push bullshit. So then why, when Elad Naharai made this thread calling out the account, it raised my attention? Because I had seen people I respected, as I mentioned earlier, retweeting this account. People who care deeply about what's going on in Gaza because they have a heart, and retweeted maybe without doing too much due diligence in researching the account. And unfortunately, this is not just one account doing this. Several parts of the far right have been using the war in Gaza, talking about solidarity with Palestinians, entering into conversations to grow their following so that later on they can slip the poison into your feeds. This is why I made this video. I secretly crafted this content so that you could learn about recognizing the signs of far-right recruitment and propaganda. Because fascists prey on the desperate, offering false solutions and consistently exploiting people's concerns, real or stupid, for nefarious ends. But by now, you're already here. The view count has been counted, and the watch minutes are racking up. So you might as well stay and hear me out. right? Let's gather around, kids. Let's do this again. And let old man millennial Tristan ruin your day yet again with another tale of woe and dread. Stop Zionist Hate is just a recent example of the far-right attempts to hijack anything that they can find with attention, but often various political causes for their nefarious purposes. The reason this matters is that outside the Venn diagram of weirdos that make up the bread and butter of the far right, they find other things to bring in suckers to support their causes or ideas, sometimes without even knowing that this is what they're doing. Sometimes it's as simple as referring to specific people who happen to all be Jewish, or using dog whistles or code words like globalists and New World Order. And very frustrating for this conversation, Zionists. They will change enough of their talking points to just enough steer the conversation and bring it to disaffected men who let the shittiness of modern dating culture turn them into misogynists, or disaffected men who got mad that a woman critiqued their video games, or men who saw a global pandemic kill thousands of people and decided that the most significant problem to deal with was that they didn't like wearing a mask and needles were wee scary. But sometimes they do this with causes that aren't just whinging. And they've been doing this for a very long time, so I better justify this thing that I have, shouldn't I? The first example I can think of is Henry Ford's The Dearborn Independent, a newspaper that Ford made that he forced Ford dealerships to hand out that was against the First World War. Now, I can get behind that, right? World War I was not a really great war. And I'm not just saying that because I'm shit at diplomacy and always get backstabbed by Austria. The thing, though, is that this rather crude example of my point stated its opposition to World War I because, as he claimed, Jews started wars to profit from them. So now, not only are the numerous people who don't like throwing young men into mechanical meat grinders to sate the bloodlust of inbred human pugs sitting on massive empires where they gain untold riches off of centuries of violence and exploitation of the natural resources of people around the planet, but if you are in favor of the war, those pacifists can now be dismissed as anti-Semites. Well, it was the 19-teens, so that accusation didn't hold as much weight as it did today, but you get the belabored point here. Exploiting legitimate causes to spread hate has been a go-to strategy for these guys. They've become adept at attaching their toxic beliefs to popular movements, much like a leech, a remora, or a landlord. But you might want more examples from this century. Well then, let's talk about the Boogaloo Boys. They're a group of far-right extremists who intentionally want to start a second civil war. The name comes from their desire for, quote, Civil War II, electric boogaloo. This fact and their choice of going to public events dressed like this show that they are, and I will clarify with my panel of Zoomers to clarify, cringe. They showed up at Black Lives Matter protests during the peak of BLM activism in 2020. They'd show the slogans and they'd express solidarity and they'd pretend to be allies, but were just there to stir the pot and advance their agenda. That's that Civil War agenda. This obviously wouldn't be the first and only time white people took a struggle by black people and tried to make it about themselves, but what's happening here is a bit more sinister. Now, this isn't a video about the Boogaloo Boys, but still, their movement has connections to the militia movement, which was/is made up of people who counted as their inspiration the white supremacist book, The Turner Diaries. And that makes me seriously question the Boogaloo Boys' motives. The militia movement believed that a second civil war also was going to come, but that it would be a race war. So militia-adjacent people showing up to stir up a black activist movement is, well, I have my doubts. And then there's MAGA Communism. Yup.
Under attack by commie Nazis.
This movement, with some slight inspiration from the profound weirdness of early post-Soviet Russian politics, is an attempt to sell support for Donald Trump, the billionaire. But communistly, this is one of those ideologies that could really only exist on the internet. Still, it's gotten a boost because the political compass is, and I'll repeat this, a lie. Do watch my video on that, but also just in general, people don't have a great political education. Some creators like Haz, or whatever the fuck the Red Scare podcast is doing these days, or Caleb Mopen, get attention for having a stupid grasp on politics.
Burger King.
The idea goes that the working class would totally join the neo-Bolshevik revolution if we just stopped with all the genders and the talk about racism, sexism, or any of the other things that signify class for hyper-exploitation in a capitalist economy. Does this ignore that all those women and black people and gender-diverse people are also workers, and that they also are overrepresented in the low-paying service class of America? Yeah, it does. Does this ignore that on a global scale, the real proletariat of the world are people of color in various countries around the world? Also, yes. Does it forget that Donald Trump supporters are less minimum wage, blue-collar working man guys and more small business tyrants? Joe Bob Working Man doesn't really vote, period. Yeah, it's almost as if it's an incoherent mess of beliefs because it's communism as portrayed by a fascist who has no idea what communism is. And right along with their work is tons of good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. One of this movement's prominent influencers is Jackson Hinkle, who is among the ghouls who used the atrocities occurring to the people of Gaza right now to grow his personal following, so he can say the Zionists are the reason there's a person twerking in Grand Theft Auto's trailer or something. You know, insanely petty shit that the American right is wailing about week to week. When Elad made this thread about Stop Zionist Hate, and I remembered the handle because I had seen people retweeting it, I knew things weren't great for civilization, right? Dedicated anti-fascists who, because they didn't look into it, just put the old RT on an account they didn't know and gave attention to an account that spreads Holocaust denial without even knowing it. And that's the key factor here. This infiltration results in people making friends with Nazis and spreading anti-Semitic bullshit without even knowing that's what they're doing. Nazis aren't stupid. Okay, they're not all stupid. They do this because it works. So I actually talked to Elad Neharai about how it is they're doing what they're doing.
The idea is there's something that's trending online. It could be like Taylor Swift or something like that. And you want to grow your own audience. So you glob onto that cause. You pretend like you're for it or against it to ride the wave of like Taylor Swift news or something like that. And because you're doing that, you're able to gain an audience. You're able to later convert them. You're able to really grow an audience really quickly, especially if you just pander to whatever they believe, and you brand yourself correctly. And then the idea is like, as time passes, then you can start to sell your product to them, right? So as you're building an audience, you start to grow your social media accounts, you start to gain engagement, and people are viewing your brand positively. Then later you have this audience that associates you with their cause or their beliefs. And now you can start to sell your ideas to them, or you can sell your product to them. So that applies just as much to a brand as it does to a hate group or a political movement. One of the other things that happened in this was audience sharing between influencers, right? So there's Lucas Gage, there's Jackson Hinkle, there's Censored Men, these like really, really big accounts that started sharing each other's content. That also happened with Stop Zionist Hate. The way it grew was Censored Men uplifted it. It's quite possibly also a connection because the account literally had 300 followers when Censored Men shared their content. And then Censored Men had like hundreds of thousands at that point. It's like a combination of jumping on news and also sharing audience with other influencers and then kind of growing from there. It's really like basic marketing.
The next thing you might be wondering is the inconsistency at play here. MAGA Communism is a complete contradiction of terms. One is an explicitly right-wing pro-capitalism position supported by a literal billionaire with a history of screwing over his workers. The other is a liberatory movement meant to unseat those in power to create a world where an individual having power is a relic of the past. Stop Zionist Hate, claiming to support Palestine, a country of overwhelmingly non-white people, while espousing openly white supremacist ideology, focused on the idea that different races are constantly in conflict, and that if one loses, it's because they were too weak, and therefore, it's a good thing. It's naked hypocrisy. It makes no damn sense, and I'm here to tell you that's the point. Fascist ideology is not only an exercise in contradiction, but openly embraces and thrives off of it. Imagine longing for a mythic past while preaching ultranationalism and authoritarianism. Or they campaign against corruption while embracing corruption with open arms. And let's not forget historians like Timothy Snyder have pointed out that fascism is all about celebrating what they call the will to power over reason and law. Their belief structure is less about seeing the world as it is and making it the one they desire, but through sheer will and violence, forced reality to fit their beliefs. You see it in the Flat Earth movement, you see it in QAnon, and you see it here. Dan Olson made a whole goddamn video about it.
The reason they aren't more bothered by Q constantly getting things wrong, why they aren't more bothered by the extreme inconsistencies and outright contradictions, by the claims that are just materially wrong, is because it gives them power over others who are bound by something as weak and flimsy as reality. They claim to be against corruption while hanging their hopes on an openly corrupt man, and that naked hypocrisy is the point. They will effortlessly carve out an exception because it makes them exceptional. They engage in wild hypocrisy as an act of domination, adhering to something demonstrably untrue out of spite, because they believe that power belongs to those with the greatest will to take it, and what greater sign of will than the ability to override truth. Their will is a hammer that they are using to beat reality itself into a shape of their choosing. A simple world where reality is exactly what it looks like through their eyes, devoid of complexity, devoid of change, where they are right and their enemies are silent. They are trying to build a flat earth.
Fascists often claim to desire order, but they thrive on chaos and confusion. Fascism is, at its core, a systematic attempt to destroy primarily liberal democratic societies. How is immaterial. They will support private property rights while seeking to eliminate the autonomy capital has from the state. They will keep reactionary politics designed to reaffirm traditional values and reassert the old status quo, but they'll clothe it as if they're revolutionaries, tearing down a new order to make something never seen before. The inconsistent and hypocrisy of Stop Zionist Hate, the Boogaloo Boys, the MAGA Communists, isn't a bug in their system, it's the feature. It's a tool to destroy the other ideologies they see as weak because they insist on grounding themselves in rationality, logic, and reality. In a political climate like the US, where all political education has been eradicated and the entirety of political participation is based on group identity, sloganeering, and feelings, this is a particularly effective tactic. Fascism has been particularly successful after the advent of new mass media formats. Mass media formats necessitate an abstraction, a breakdown of an idea into simplified core parts. New forms of media technology also change people's relationship with information, increasing the volume and diversity of streams of information. Can you tell that I'm a communication historian yet? Fascists can latch on to both of these tendencies to significant effect. Every new form of mass media opens up a new avenue for people to spread messages to a mass audience. But that message has to be encoded somehow, either converted to radio waves, printed in words, or processed as video. This abstracts away what could be communicated in a simple one-on-one conversation. Mass media limits clarification, nuance, and complexity. However, it feeds on the human tendency to prefer something simple, understandable, and with a compelling narrative. Fascism as an ideology is about taking complex systems of the world, ruthless forces of economics and capital, and the chaotic mess of the events of human affairs, and reduce it to a clear, understandable enemy to defeat, spinning misinformation, guilt by association, and scapegoating into what we call conspiracy theories. You can then point to the them behind world events, the them often being Jews. It's at the heart of every conspiracy theory and fascist ideology. It's why the two are basically inseparable, and you never find one without finding the other eventually. So we saw this become successful with the advent of radio-based communication. Fascist ideas and the mass adoption of radio are tightly interlinked. Fascism requires a steady stream of propaganda, which this technology excels at. It also doesn't hurt that in times of economic instability, these ideas are much more palatable to the rich than, say, maybe questioning why we decided as a civilization that you need money to have a place to live, or clothes to wear, or food to eat. And it's happened again with the mass adoption of the internet as a communications medium. Again, fascists have the advantage for multiple reasons. It's way easier to make shit up and spout it out at high volume than it is to make nuanced, complex stuff that tries to illuminate the myriad of chaotic processes that make the world run. Furthermore, the Red Scares and Cold War have made it feel to many liberals who control our major platforms much more comfortable with the idea of allowing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on their platform in the name of free speech and, the marketplace of ideas, but it's okay to suppress counter voices, namely the political left. The New York Times is way more comfortable profiling the charming, affable Nazi than the charming, affable communist. As philosopher Walter Benjamin pointed out, fascism seeks to organize the proletarian masses, but without altering the property structure that oppresses them. It allows the masses to express themselves while preserving property relations, turning politics into spectacle. And there's no better way to spread a spectacle than mass media. And that's what Stop Zionist Hate is doing, taking the atrocities happening in Gaza, enabled by the complicated precedents of Cold War alliances, settler colonialism, and white supremacy, and reduce it down to Zionists, which again is both a valuable term for understanding the ideology that continues the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and an anti-Semitic dog whistle, depending on context. And that fucking sucks. Ugh. So let's try to break this down. When are anti-Semites doing an anti-Semitism without explicitly saying anti-Semitic things? If any conservatives got this far, this lesson will help you a lot, as your weasel words for avoiding accusations of racism is usually to say that if someone isn't burning a cross and saying slurs, then they aren't doing racism. And even then, who knows? The thing is, anti-Semitism and racist dog whistles in general are designed to do the kind of thing I talked about at the beginning of this video. How do we get someone making racist associations and saying things right out of the racism handbook, but with just enough distance and coding that they might not even themselves be aware that's what they're doing? But let's start with the term Zionist, as this is a complicated term to talk about in modern discourse, especially in our heavy message compressed mass media platform of social media. Zionism is a political movement that emerged in the 19th century with the intent to make a Jewish homeland of Israel. Anti-Zionism is a position that opposes Israel as a Jewish state. Not the opposition of Jews living in Israel, but the opposition to a state explicitly just for one religious ethnic group. Anti-Semitism is hatred for Jewish people. So, very quickly and obviously, these are different terms that should be unambiguous. Still, fascists literally thrive on messing up discourse, so it has obviously gotten all muddy. But it's important to say loud and unambiguously that anti-Zionism and criticism of the acts of Israel are not anti-Semitic. That shit only gets anti-Semitic when the state of Israel and all Jews get inflated, a common action between the Israeli far-right and anti-Semites. It's critical to point out that decades of shouting anti-Semitism as a way to deflect the horrific things Israel has done to the people they occupy illegally has thus made it easier to smuggle real anti-Semitism into this discourse under the guise of criticizing Israel. Zionism as an anti-Semitic dog whistle for Jews will come out when people assume or reinforce this connection. If Zionism is invoked in a way that implies a conspiracy or a plot to manipulate the world, that's anti-Semitism. I would even argue as a conspiracy theory researcher that The concept of conspiracy theories are an anti-Semitic dog whistle. But honestly, that's a little bit too spicy of a take and worthy of a video in and of itself. I think there's also more than a pinch of anti-Semitism in denying that regardless of Israel, its actions, or whatever, that Jews somehow don't have a historical connection to this land of their ancient ancestors. The main stickler here is that they are not the only people with a connection to this place, and it certainly doesn't justify mass land displacement, illegal occupation, and indiscriminate murder. As for other discourses, terms like the deep state in modern context, or other terms to refer to small groups of people who manipulate and drive global politics, like all of that stuff, that's an anti-Semitism. Other code words like globalists or the New World Order began life as a way to scrape the serial numbers off of anti-Semitic terms to get the survivalist and militia crowds pushing for the same goals back in the 90s, and those terms still continue today. Unfortunately, it's all messy, and there's a lot of context to know. This isn't a way to talk down or overly complicate things, but a call to be alert and pay attention to what people say, because no one is immune. No one.
People the past 4 months have picked up that they have stuck with as true, that have not been confirmed or have been fully debunked or have been adjusted over time. And, that happens. This is a thing that we're dealing with. But the problem is that the choice to pick up those things and to stick with them, it builds a muscle, a bad type of muscle, by weakening a good muscle that we should have, which is a healthy dose of skepticism, a healthy reflex of, let me try and find sourcing on this. Let me look into what that sourcing is to see if they're on the up and up. I'm busy. I think this just sounds nice and I'm just going to go with it. Then going to build an entire political identity around it and be motivated by it and allow it to take me where it takes me. Allow yourself to be uncertain. It's okay to not know. That doesn't mean denialism. It means take the time to look into it, to try to find out. And if you don't know, move on. Go plant some sunflowers.
Conspiratorial thinking and reducing complex systems and structures to simple narratives is, unfortunately, part of how human brains operate. We always see intentionality behind randomness. We see faces on Mars. We see climate change-induced wildfires and think it's some sort of space laser. Unfortunately, it's part of the human experience, and we always need to be on guard to suppress it. And groups like Stop Zionist Hate and other fascists exploit systemic issues in social media. Namely, moderation is a mix of expensive and not immediately profitable next quarter, so the amoral, money-devouring machines we call corporations don't invest in it, or they just do the minimum amount that they can do to avoid bad press. Many social media platforms are also American, and America has a long legal history of having this absolutist version of free speech that asserts that allowing white supremacists to intimidate oppressed minorities off their platform with threats and harassment must be protected, while nuking that account so that many others can use the platform is somehow censorship. Unfortunately, the people in charge of many social media platforms have a 17-year-old boy's understanding of philosophy, and they float comfortably on a relentlessly enabling pillow of privilege due to them all being wealthy beyond having any connection to the human experience. Or it's just Twitter, where the owner is actively being radicalized to the far right in real time as everyone in his life turns on him. It's turned out all the money in the world isn't worth having to be the partner or child of the most cringe reactionary asshole in the local group. Another systemic issue causing the rise of the far right is that we're just spiraling through late capitalism. People are miserable. There's no jobs. A fact that I am living through right now. Everyone's standard of living is dropping and the environment is collapsing. The result of this capitalist project, which began as a way to justify slavery and colonialism, is reaching more and more crises. And during that, people look for what happened. And you can explain what happened in just 3,000 simple pages spread across 3 books with literal math homework inside. Or You can blame minorities, often Jews. This is why sometimes anti-Semitism gets called the socialism of fools. It's a diversion that is very convenient to those with all the power in society because it doesn't challenge their place in the economic hierarchy. I think I mentioned on It's Probably Not Aliens, that's why I call fascism super capitalism. But we all fall for conspiracy theories. It's just an ugly shortcut of our heads. Hang around the left long enough and everything bad or complicated will have the CIA lurking behind it.
Unfortunately, and I speak as someone of sort of Jewish heritage on my mother's side, I'm not practicing and I'm not particularly sort of devout or anything, but it's something that I'm aware of. My ancestors were given shelter here in the UK because they were fleeing some appalling pogrom in Central Europe, which was no doubt driven by a conspiracy theory that was, popular across Europe on both the left and the right of the political spectrum, unfortunately. And in our article, Stephen and I kind of deal with that because it's a kind of convenient sort of and very adaptable conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism, basically, isn't it? Because the right people who are kind of racial supremacists can use it because they think that it proves some point about racism and people behaving in a certain way because they have, a big nose or a certain color of skin or coming from a certain part of the Middle East. It was called the Socialism of fools for long periods of time, where you had a kind of left-wing anti-Semitism. That's still that hasn't been got rid of either, where there's this notion that, okay, we are concerned about social inequality and social injustice. Who do we blame for that? Well, it seems to us that Jews control finance and run banks and so on and so forth. Sometimes conspiracy theories survive and flourish because they are very useful to different sorts of ideological interests, and therefore they prove to be that much more durable through history.
Now, while the political right more or less relies on conspiracy theories to function, and the left has conspiracies as a known quantity, we don't often talk about liberals or centrists and how they get into conspiracy theories. Really? These people? The people who hate conspiracy theories and misinformation so much that they make stupid charts like this to gauge who is the most centrist and therefore trustworthy news source? Well, boy, do I have something for you. The expert quoted earlier is a media studies professor named Tom Sykes, who, with fellow scholar Stephen Harper, no, not that one, wrote the article Conspiracy Theories Left, Right, and Center. He's a real working academic and for some reason also decided to talk to me about his work. He and Harper put together studying the far center conspiracy theories.
There's this sort of knee-jerk reaction that comes from often liberals, centrists, whatever you want to call them, that when you dare to sort of suggest that maybe their narratives, they're very simplistic narratives and reductionist narratives about Putin or Trump or Jeremy Corbyn in my country, for example, or Bernie Sanders or whoever, when you suggest that there's something wrong with that, they will all too often turn around and accuse you of somehow being in the pay of the Kremlin or some pro-Chinese puppet. And it's kind of pathetic. And the thing is, it's hypocritical because that would be they would call that childish if it was someone on the far left or the far right, as they see it, online, behaving in that very kind of juvenile way. They would be the first to call that out, but they don't recognize it when they do it themselves. When they talk about conspiracism and misinformation and disinformation and those other terms that get connected to it, post-truth and so forth, what they're also talking about is sort of a resistance to evidence and kind of rational thought and logic. And again, it's not just the extremist sort of Princess Diana conspiracy theorists that are prone to that. You find it also right in the kind of political mainstream and in the center of our politics and our media and our culture. Why should this kind of fallacious sort of thinking about the world only be limited to a particular point on the political spectrum?
So, what do we do? How do we fight back against fascist indoctrination and the general collapse of humanity into a dark, evil cesspit? Everyone who I talked to for this video pointed out that the problems of disinformation, conspiracy, and fascist recruitment are systemic, and that honestly confronting the issue in a meaningful way would require solutions that involve improving content moderation online or other things that will never happen due to the current mode of economic ideology being Make the line go up, no matter what. But you can at least arm yourself against this kind of stuff. A little. It's very much about verifying sources, learning who you're retweeting, and importantly, realizing that fascists deal with whistles, tropes, and stereotypes. The kind of evasive language that might throw some people off. Suppose you think some significant event results from a small, organized group of people out for world domination. In that case, that's when you really need to take a breath and maybe check yourself. Well, that was easy. It only took... Oh, God. This was supposed to be a half-hour video.
It's late at night, and here I am scrolling through Elon's horrible website trying to find out who this Stop Zionist hate account is. I'm not even sure if I will find out or if I'll fail and then try to find some other way to make a video happen. However, this is part of my mission on this channel, to bring truth amidst a rising tide of misinformation. This path I've taken wasn't easy. It's a delicate balance I have to make, creating impactful content that speaks truth to power, but without getting lost in the sea of content restrictions we face today. That's where Nebula comes in. It's not yet another streaming platform, but a haven for creators like me who often find themselves at odds with traditional platforms' limitations. On Nebula, I can dive deep into topics like this one without fear, and on Nebula, there's a treasure trove of content from extended cuts to interviews to original series or even whole-ass movies, all shedding light on the subjects that matter by your favorite creators like Sized Joel or FD Signifier or even me. Nebula Originals, though, are the real flagship. Amazing works of creativity bringing you unique, unconstrained narratives. Think of Nebula as a way that we creators found to talk about what's important and not necessarily what will make it going up against Jimmy Kimmel on the front page. And speaking of unique content, there's an exclusive interview with my friend Jeremy, the journalist I worked on with my last video. We get a lot more into his personal story, advocating for those in Palestine, and tons of history I wasn't able to fit in the already 2-hour video that did come out. Now, I also know there's a lot of fans of Lindsay Ellis in my community, and I'm sure that many of you are aware that she stopped making her videos a few years ago on YouTube to make exclusive Nebula originals. And honestly, a lot of these are her best work. The most recent one is called The Ballad of John and Yoko, and it goes into a whole in-depth analysis of Yoko Ono and her place in culture and the unfair treatment she got by culture and all the bullshit she had to put up with taking all of these myths about breaking up the Beatles and such. And I didn't know any of this stuff because I'm not much of like a Beatles guy, but I was captivated by just the story about like what this woman had to go through. And Lindsay's always got a wonderful way of making stories about people that makes it gut-wrenching in a way that you would never have conceived of otherwise. It's like one of the best traits of video essayists, and I guess that's why she's still the reigning champ. So yeah, if there's one you're gonna watch that one. If you believe in supporting independent creators and value unrestricted content like mine, join Nebula. But I also know money's a thing, so if you use my link below or the QR code if you're on a TV, you can get a 40% discount on an annual plan, a real set it and forget it type thing. You can just watch, knowing that you helped bring all this amazing stuff into existence and you're fueling what comes next. You're making a stand for truth and creativity. Speaking of which, I have my own piece of truth and creativity I'm trying to enrich the world with right now, so why don't we get back to it?
We've exposed a disturbing trend. Far-right groups cloaking themselves in the legitimacy of pro-Palestinian activism to further their anti-Semitic ideology. The guise of legitimate activism serves as a Trojan horse, enabling these groups to infiltrate mainstream discourse and spread their hateful beliefs under the cover of advocating for Palestinian rights. I think there's a new circle in hell for people who are doing this. Families and communities currently experiencing horrific genocidal violence find themselves caught in the crossfire of an ideological war they neither chose nor supported. The long-term consequences spill onto the streets, shaping perceptions, fueling prejudice, and, at times, inspiring violence. The damage done to the social fabric is real and profound, tearing at the very heart of our shared humanity, shaping the world we navigate daily in an era where information is as accessible as it is manipulable. Our societal perceptions are constantly at the mercy of bad actors. The ability to discern truth from propaganda, to question rather than consume information uncritically, is a civic duty. Understanding the intentions behind information we receive is paramount to preserving the integrity of our discourse. It's the least we can do until we realize capitalism, which will always lean media companies in this direction, is bad, actually. And you can also help me make stuff like this, which I think is a bit of a public good, by signing up for Nebula. The tactics of far-right groups masquerading as champions of justice while peddling the oldest of hatreds reveal a chilling reflection of our society's vulnerabilities. We stand at this crossroads with our choices echoing far beyond our screens, shaping the legacy we leave for generations to come. Let's reaffirm our commitment to a world where empathy, understanding, and solidarity outshine the darkest corners of human deception. Maybe in the quiet moments that follow this video, we'll find the courage to confront the uncomfortable and challenge the narratives that seek to divide us, and to rekindle the light of hope in a world weary from the weight of unchallenged lies. All right. I did the thing. Whew. Sweaty.